Okay, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Strange Planet Podcast, and it has been a very interesting week. To start off, a New York judge found that Donald Trump and the Trump Organization engaged in years of financial fraud. Donald Trump has lied for years about how he inflated his earnings and the value of his real estate holdings, and now he could possibly lose all of his properties, including Trump Tower, and he may never be able to do business in the state of New York ever again. On top of that, all of Donald Trump's business certificates that were registered in the state of New York are now canceled. All of them. Also, the appeals court denied Trump's motion to delay the trial where they will assess damages, and it starts this Monday. And also, Letitia James's witness list for the trial includes Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and Ivanka, as well as Michael Cohen. God bless Letitia James for her great work, because the corruption and the lies is the definition of Trump, and he should never be able to hold any office ever again. He probably shouldn't have in the first place, but here we are now. He's just clearly a criminal and a fraud. But moving away from that clown and moving to a new set of clowns, which also brings us to the topic of this episode, and it is the second Republican debate, which was this past Wednesday. And I gotta say, it was even more of a circus than the first one, which was last month. There was just no answering of any of the questions that the moderators asked. Most of the candidates basically just dodged every question. Nobody listened to any of the directions that the moderators asked. There was a lot of arguing. Everybody was pretty much talking over one another, out of turn, so you couldn't really understand anything anyone was saying. It was more or less a giant circus with no content. And after seeing this, there's no question as to why the Ringling Brothers went out of business. There was everything from low blows to one another to DeSantis and actually Chris Christie, in my opinion, doing the right thing and calling out Trump in his disastrous last term and his lack of presence at the debates. So, Rook and Mark, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I guess it's like you said, G. It's just that, they didn't answer any single question. It was all about China and all about, Biden's failing financial plan, Bidenomics, and all this other stuff. It was just every chance they take a stab at Biden and bring up the border wall and all this other stuff. And the only thing I have to give any of them credit for is for having brought up Trump in the first place, to have him not there at the debate. That would have made the debate way more interesting.
Yeah, and I give them a lot of credit, especially, it was a strange question, but it's Fox News, right? So you shouldn't be surprised here. But they brought up at the end the voting off like the island or something ridiculous like that. And, like most of the other questions, nobody answered it. But I still feel like Chris Christie was the only one that did answer the question technically, but he had the right answer, really. And it was to vote Trump off the island because he doesn't belong there. Look at the disaster of last presidential term and the $8 trillion in debt and the division and the racism and Christ, I can keep going on if I wanted to. But I felt like that was a good take out of the whole thing. But overall, it's still like no one on that stage is really qualified to be a president because then none of them even look.
Yeah, you're right. I think none of them looked like the next president of the United States. I thought that Ron DeSantis actually did a little bit better than he did last time. He definitely was more aggressive in terms of getting response time and, trying to show some form of leadership. He was the one who actually rejected the voting off the island question.
Yep.
And he kind of took the lead in that. I think he had a moment like that in the first debate where he said, you know what, we're not going to answer this question. He sort of led the charge there. Other than that, I think, some of the candidates had their moments, but I loved Chris Christie's line on Donald Trump. He's like, Donald, I know you're watching. I know you can't help it. Then he proceeded to rip on him. And then he ended with sort of a quip about, Donald Trump ducking the debates. And he's like, pretty soon, we're not going to be able to call him Donald Trump. We're going to have to call him Donald Duck. I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was a play of the game.
Yeah, no, and Trump was watching.
Oh,
So
of course. Yeah.
it's gotta dig into Trump a little bit. I thought Mike Pence, I kind of feel bad for him because he tried to tell a couple of jokes and the audience was silent.
Yep.
Um, no, it was really painful.
It was.
Even when he tried, to sound presidential and ended his statements on like a positive high note that was supposed to get applause from the crowd. No one applauded. It was just crickets.
Yep.
He, even things that I thought sounded, reasonable or even strong, there was just no response from the audience. And that's not really what you want to hear if you want to go up in the polls.
Exactly. And another thing I will add is I'll say Nikki Haley definitely gets a play of the game too when she was calling out Vivek and saying that everyone is now kind of dumber, have now listened to him. It reminded me of that Billy Madison or Happy, I forget what movie. I think it was Billy Madison. But I mean, she's not wrong either. And to tell you the truth, that's another take that I got from this. That guy, Vivek, is out of his freaking mind. And his last little statement there, when him still suckling at the Trump teat, like, I don't know if he realizes, I mean, I'm sure he probably does, that even if it came down to Trump and him, they're not going to take him. They're going to go with Trump. You know what I mean? So he's fighting a losing war if he keeps this up.
I really think that he knows that. He knows that he's not going to be picked over Trump. He's probably either gunning for a position with Trump, possibly vice president, to attract younger voters. But it also could be the case that, and this is sort of speculation, but there may be some type of understanding between him and Mr. Trump in terms of him basically representing Trump on that stage while Trump isn't there and defending Trump's record, because you've never heard anything, zero, about him attacking Trump. All he says about Trump is like, I defend his record completely, and we're just gonna, build on the Trump legacy. That's all he wants to do. He doesn't want to criticize Trump at all. He's not running against Trump at all.
No, you're right. And it seems like he's trying to house what's left of it. You know what I mean? Like he wants to try to see if he could be maybe the ringleader of that circus and try to pick up where he left off in a sense. And to be honest, that's just not I don't see that going in a positive direction whatsoever. You know what I mean?
The craziest thing about Vivek Ramaswamy's position is on the Ukraine issue. He says, yeah, Putin may be an evil dictator, but Ukraine's not exactly good either. That doesn't mean that Ukraine's not bad. Like, what the fuck?
For real.
Like, I just don't understand how you can equate Ukraine, whose country was invaded systematically by Russia. I don't see how you could equate them with Putin.
Right.
Ukraine was there minding its own business, not even a NATO ally, and first of all, they got Crimea taken in 2014. No one asked for Putin to come in and take Crimea. And then now he's trying to take the rest of the country. That's not his fucking land.
Exactly.
Ukraine is an independent, sovereign state, and Putin invaded it. And it's not a territorial dispute. That's like if Russia came over here and decided, you know what, I think this belongs to me, and takes New York or something like that. That would be absolutely ridiculous, and we wouldn't stand for it, and the Ukrainians shouldn't either.
Exactly. That's why I'm saying a lot of that's a very, very right-wing nut job, a very, very one-track narrow road with that guy. You know what I mean? And it's just not sensible at all.
It seems like some Republicans on that stage, like Nikki Haley and Governor Chris Christie, they understand that Russia's not our friend, and that by supporting Ukraine's efforts, we are actually, to use a word they use, degrading Russia's military capability. So we're not sending troops over there. We have no troops in Ukraine, but we're sending money and we're sending ammunition, weapons, we're sending those to Ukraine so that Russia is expending its entire military might trying to bring down this country. And they're having a very tough time of doing it because of our support and the support of our NATO allies. And that is much cheaper than us having to send troops there, because we don't have to. If he takes over Ukraine, then that means that he might march on Poland next.
Exactly. I was going to say that.
And China might invade Taiwan. Now that we're just letting countries take over things that they want,
that
why
isn't
not?
theirs.
Right. Like we will show that we aren't standing by defending the sovereignty of other nations. And they like to talk about, oh, we have to secure our border, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. But that doesn't mean that we turn insular and ignore the rest of the world. We are the most powerful nation in the world. We have the strongest military by far. And if we don't use our power to deter Russia and China from using their power to exercise the will over other countries, then we are going to be at a severe disadvantage and may end up in a global conflict with them, because they're not just going to stop at Taiwan. And they have shown that they are willing to expand past those borders. Like China previously tried to take over much of the Asian Pacific. Russia obviously had the Soviet Union, where they owned basically half of Europe. So those countries want to expand past, to at least get back to where they were before. Now, that may be more true of Russia than China. China's a little enigmatic. They don't really express their will in the way that Russia does. But they make no secret that they want Taiwan back. They still think Taiwan is theirs. And actually, Taiwan is one of the only two countries, I believe, in the world that isn't recognized by the United Nations as a country, the other being the Holy See, which is the Vatican. So, Taiwan, we can't recognize Taiwan because China would throw a fit, and they're a permanent member of the Security Council. And so they have veto power over Security Council measures, which are the things that it's like war and peace. So anything that affects, conflict in a large way that would lead to war, China has veto power over. And so we have to be very careful about how we deter these countries. But another thing that I actually wanted to go into, though, was this TikTok business.
Okay.
Now, people know that I'm not a fan of TikTok.
Me neither.
I think it's just an obnoxious platform. It may have some good uses, but I think it is contributing or exacerbating the short attention spans of people. And it's just filled with misinformation. People have a lack of trust in traditional media, and that has been building over the past few decades. We have more sources from which to get media. But TikTok represents like the evolution of that mistrust. And now anyone can sort of have a platform and spout the most ridiculous bullshit, and you'll find an audience. As long as you say something outrageous and crazy, you will entertain people or make some people who are already predisposed to thinking in a certain way, you will make them think that they are smart, and you will validate those views, and you will let them know that their views are shared by other people. And
right. And
I think that's a very dangerous thing.
I 100% agree. And actually, it is, I do hear you with the TikTok, but I almost put that in the basket of all social media in general. Now, yeah, TikTok is probably the worst one out of all of it, but all of them, Facebook, Instagram, all of that stuff is not really good in any way.
Where I think TikTok differs, I don't know if people remember the movie There's Something About Mary, and you had the 6-second abs, and then they were like, oh, well, you could do 5-second abs.
Right.
I feel like TikTok is like trying to do 5-second abs. So like instead of, short form content like YouTube or things like that, you have someone trying to condense the conveyance of information into 30 seconds, 15 seconds, just trying to grab people's attention in the most outrageous way possible, regardless of the validity of the content. And I think that's bad. And the algorithms that a lot of social media platforms, including Facebook, YouTube, they learn about their viewer or listener, and then they make suggestions based upon that. So if you're already predisposed to crazy, wacky, insane, untrue information, then that's just going to feed you more of it. And it's just going to, breed the cynicism into the American psyche even more than it has been previously.
Right. Because you figure at this point, it's like a competition to do that. So it's not just one whack job spewing all this, crazy conspiracy theories. So there's like millions of people doing it. So by you liking and following one, it's just going to lead to another, and then another, and then another. And then the next thing you know, you're in this insane loop of just not real facts and just bullshit, really. And if you're simple-minded and don't know the difference between your right and your left, you're going to believe this shit. You know what I mean? And none of it is real.
Yeah. And just getting back to the debate for a second, I thought it was funny that they were ranting and raving against TikTok for an entirely different reason. It was because of China. And they think that China is using it to surveil U.S. citizens, and that's part of the reason that TikTok is banned on government cell phones. But I thought it was just funny and ironic that while they were ranting and raving against TikTok, after every single, and I think even one of the questions was directed in a negative way toward TikTok by the moderators. But I just want to make a note that after every commercial break or during every commercial break, there was a TikTok commercial.
Yeah.
I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
I'll say this, though. One of the things I have to give credit to Ramaswamy about is he's right. If they want to win, they'll start trying to target the younger crowd. And sadly enough, using TikTok is one of those reasons. It's one of those things that can do that for them. Because they're going to get into the young kids' minds and like, let's go Republican because this, that, the other thing. It's what's hot. It's what's new. Sadly, it's what it is.
You heard him, though. He also wants to ban all social media platforms for children 16 and under.
Yep.
Which is kind of a nanny state thing to do.
True.
Yeah, he did say that. That is true. And he said that a couple of times. It wasn't just once either. And technically, I don't know whether or not that's going to make a big difference. I mean, I don't think that young kids should really be on it. So that's probably a good idea. But
but your idea, I don't think the government should be getting in the business of telling
what you should and
kids
shouldn't watch,
what they should and shouldn't be able to engage in. That should be between parents and their kids if they want them to be on that platform. And I think that it'll be like, it's dangerously addictive and whatnot. But I think if you think that government's going to be able to stop kids from engaging in social media, which is like their, number one, it's like TV for us growing up or video games. Like, you take away their social media, they will hate you forever. They will grow up hating the party that took away social media.
Yeah, that's actually very, very true.
And it'll be like a ban on cigarettes or weed or whatever. they'll be able to get around it,
Right, or like
and
alcohol or
get
something.
and get their hands on that addiction. Kids know technology better than most adults, so they'll be able to find ways around it. And we had things like Napster, and we were able to
LimeWire.
get like we were able to get free music and go around restrictions on that. And so don't underestimate kids' ability to get around restrictions on technology.
That's very, very true. And one thing I also wanted to know, going back to the debates here as well, is once again I'm hearing a lot of like numbers, just like I did last debate, but like no supporting information. So sometimes it makes you feel like they're just pulling some of these numbers out of their ass. You know what I mean? Like I remember one thing they brought up last debate, and they brought it up again this debate, is they kept saying that Bidenomics is a failure. And now in this debate, I remember, I forget who said it, but somebody said that Biden added like 4 or 5 trillion to the debt. If I'm not mistaken, the last time I took a look at it, he took away some of the debt. He didn't add to it. So correct me if I'm wrong there.
Well, he did add to the debt. Every president ever since Clinton's last couple of terms, where he generated a surplus, adds to the debt. So I think it bears, mentioning that there's a difference between deficit and debt. Deficit is when you spend more than you take in a given year. So every year, because we spend more than we take in taxes, then we have a deficit, which is the amount of money we have to go and borrow. And that deficit every year gets added to the debt. The debt is the cumulative total of our deficits year over year. So we haven't been generating surpluses since Clinton.
Right.
So what we do in terms of the overall debt is we either keep adding to it at an increasing rate, or we reduce it in terms of not reducing the overall number, but it grows slower because we reduce the amount of deficit we're adding each year.
Okay.
That's the trajectory that Obama was on, and then Trump got in and blew it up again. Biden had less deficit spending than Trump, but he still hasn't reduced the debt because we haven't produced a surplus yet.
Right. I see what you're saying. So technically there is some truth to it, but not exactly. And going to the next point I wanted to bring up here too is actually, let me just ask you guys and see what your take is on this. I heard someone say it. I don't remember. Once again, I don't remember exactly who said it. I want to say it might have been DeSantis, but I could be mistaken. But they said we're in a Cold War with China. Do you think we're in a Cold War with China? Is the question.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to define a Cold War as two nations who are hostile toward one another and take actions that aren't direct but sort of indirect, not using the military but using other means to undermine each other, then sure, we're in a Cold War. They're definitely our adversary in terms of military. They're trying to build up their military. They're trying to gain control over the Pacific region so that they can secure that area over there. We're adversaries with them in terms of economics. They're one of the largest economies in the world, and they are, just by sheer numbers and growth, they're catching up to us in some ways. But I don't think that if you define Cold War as what we had against the Soviet Union, no, that's not what's happening here.
All right.
Because that was more of a proxy war where we would fight over different nations as to whether they would be communist or capitalist, whether they, chose to have a more authoritarian government or democracy. And so there's some argument to be made that China is, partnering with Russia and, helping them out with brokering deals with North Korea to provide them with weapons and to engage in combat in Ukraine. And the US is supplying Ukraine with weapons. So it's sort of like a proxy war there, but not to the same extent as, we had when we, actually sent troops into Vietnam.
That's what I was getting
try to
at.
prevent them from becoming a communist country.
All right, that makes sense then.
It wasn't like we actually had troops and they were driven back in Korea. And that's why we have North and South Korea, because basically China sent in, they were trying to push us back and take over the whole Korean peninsula. And so it's not that type of more direct military conflict, but there is some sort of alliances. It's a sort of a battle of alliances in terms of influencing what happens in Ukraine.
Right. So you'd say it's kind of like manipulating or spiting more than it is, like warfare, literally, per se.
Well, no, I mean, it is warfare in Ukraine, but I would say that it's less of a Cold War of sorts than it was, after World War II and leading up to, the beginning of the 90s. That was the Cold War era where Russia and the US, we were fighting wars in different countries over whether those countries became democracies or communists or part of the Soviet Union. And I guess the conflict is less direct than it was in the Cold War.
Right. Because that's what I was going to say, because I could see how it could be seen as a Cold War, but at the same time, I feel like it isn't at the same time.
I would say that your question originally was, are we in a Cold War with China?
Right.
Now, China is a lot more attenuated than Russia in terms of its involvement in Ukraine. But yeah, they are sort of forming a partnership with Russia, who's at war in Ukraine. They are facilitating, the North Koreans' provision of arms to Russia to fight that war in Ukraine. So I get the argument that it's a Cold War of sorts, but I wouldn't say it's in the same way as Russia, who's directly participating in a military conflict in a country with which we are sending aid and arms to. So I would say there's an argument to be made that China is involved in a Cold War with us. They obviously want to cause some trouble with us, in terms of, hacking and spying and stealing intellectual property. But, they're more of an economic competitor with us. They know they don't stand a chance with us militarily, so that's not where their strength lies. Their strength lies in competing with us economically, which they've had a lot more success on.
I guess moving forward here, another thing I did want to bring up was the negligence of answers that all of them up there basically did at some point. You know what I mean? Like, the moderator asked Pence about questions about DACA and like Obamacare questions, and you didn't get a straight answer. But I'm not going to just single out Pence because they all were like that. So when I see something like that happen, in my opinion, I kind of feel like it's not going to change. Then they don't have interest in it. So if some of those topics matter to you, that may not be your candidate, put it that way, because obviously you didn't get a straight answer. So they're not really thinking about things like that.
Yeah, I mean, most of the questions weren't, or at least the tough questions weren't answered directly by the candidates.
At
And
all.
in some cases, they just completely ignored the moderators and talked amongst themselves and yelled at each other.
Right.
If you notice, they didn't even have time for closing statements as they usually have at debates.
Right. They didn't. It just cut out. Yeah, because there's too many interruptions and stuff in between. But what also kind of cracked me up was like the moderator would ask a question, and not only would the candidate not answer the question, but then the candidate decides to make up his own question and then answer that. That happened to Tim Scott. That happened, like, they were asked a specific question, say about healthcare or something, and then they'll bullshit it or try to dodge it, and then they'll be like, "Oh, well, going to what Nikki Haley was questioned that she got. I have an answer for that," but I'm like, "Yeah, that wasn't the question at hand." Like, you know what I mean? You're dodging again.
That reminds me of one of the funny things that happened was Ron DeSantis had like a canned response, and he just decided to, I forget what it was, but it was obvious that that was pre-written for him because it used alliteration. And I forget exactly what he said, but it was just hilarious to see him try to deliver it, and he didn't even deliver it well. Like, it was kind of flat, and no one really cheered for it. It was just a very flat canned response.
Yeah. But like what also made me start to feel like this was like a high school debate was while, a question was answered, maybe one of them would throw a zinger in at one of the other candidates or something. But then like you have now two or three of them arguing with one another. The moderator trying to cut in but can't. And then you got Vivek raising his hand like he's in high school. And then just like looking at it from a standpoint, I'm like, this is a circus right now. This really
at
is.
least Vivek raised his hand. The others just talk when they please, and he did as well.
Yeah, it's true too. He's guilty of that as well. But I just thought, like, I was like, well, this is the most like sloppy, not organized event ever. And like, if you thought the last debate was bad, this one, in my opinion, it's getting worse. Like, it really is. Because like there wasn't a lot of facts and a lot of content. There was just a lot of numbers once again being thrown, a lot of opinionated stuff, and them arguing amongst each other about stuff they either did in the past or stuff that they're currently doing or will do. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem very productive for a hopeful future when you look at that. Well, granted, this is also the Republican Party too, so like technically some of this can be expected. You know what I mean? But in my opinion, though, if you look at all those candidates out there and the circus we all watched, this may sound crazy, but you know who I think the winner was?
Go for it.
Biden.
Yeah, I mean, either that or Trump, because they really didn't do anything to help their chances against Trump. I mean, Chris Christie tried, but
He did. I'll give him that much.
that was he was about the only one that actually debated the Republican frontrunner.
Basically, and called him out, literally, too. Another thing I guess we could bring up here is but this isn't news either, but capitalism is king in this country. It always is. But to a certain extent, some of the crises and stuff we're going through, isn't that a result of capitalism?
What do you mean?
Well, the inflation, the grocery store prices, the gas prices, the reason why everything's ridiculously expensive. Like, there's some people that actually believe that right now we're in like a silent depression. I don't think we're on that point just yet. But at the same time, it's not great. You know what I mean? Could be worse. Could be literally the depression. But like, sometimes I feel like capitalism can cause some of this to happen.
It's really hard to say because, inflation can happen in countries that aren't necessarily capitalists. And most of the countries in the world are capitalists or engage in capitalism. So I don't think you can really hit it on capitalism, but definitely lack of regulation can contribute to some problems.
Right.
But I think it's capitalism is way too broad of an economic philosophy to pin
And
all of
say
our
that it's
problems
that.
or a lot of our problems on. It's basically the way the world operates.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, what I also in supporting information now, I mean, socialism isn't, if you're entirely socialist, that's not good either. But I feel like if we had a few more socialist practices, per se, in like healthcare and stuff, that could affect every American's life in a positive way. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying the whole country's got to be, socialist and everything, because that's not the answer either. But like your basic necessities and stuff, fire department, police department, you know what I mean? Like a lot of this, there is socialism here. And like a lot of these big businesses, you know what I mean? Like they privatize their gains and socialize their losses, which is also interesting. You know what I mean? So I felt like if we had maybe some more, so not like I said before, not completely, but a few more socialist practices, I feel like could go a long way. What do you think?
I'm not sure because it depends on what you mean. Like,
Well, use the healthcare
the
as an example.
so for healthcare, if we had public, if we had a system like in the UK or Canada or whatever, and we just have publicly funded healthcare, that would definitely help in terms of providing healthcare to everyone. But it could also come with problems like preventing people from seeing their doctors as often as they would like because there are a limited amount of resources. People don't like paying taxes, so it's going to require raising taxes in order to fund that.
True,
And that's going
but
to have to come from somewhere.
true, but obviously the taxes would have to be raised for it. But wouldn't that eliminate all the bullshit fees and costs that also come attached? So like technically you'd be paying it for your tax,
What fees and costs?
like your co-pays and all this other bullshit they like to string along sometimes that you end up having to pay.
I don't
And
know if that's bullshit. I mean, it's partially paying for the actual cost of what you're getting.
true, but like right now, God forbid, some old lady slips on ice during the winter or something and breaks her leg or something. Wouldn't that prevent a $2,500 to $3,000 ambulance visit? Wouldn't that make that a little bit less expensive?
Not necessarily.
Really?
So, if you want to have complete government health care, like in terms of having government hire doctors and own hospitals, and the government owns some hospitals, but most hospitals are private. They have to own the ambulance services, and that's a lot of costs in there. And so you have to also hire and train qualified people. That's a lot of
There's a job growth.
no, I mean it's done by the private sector now, so I don't know if that would be job growth.
But wouldn't it like kind of limit what all these health insurance companies are hitting you with and stuff too? Or even maybe take out some of the middlemen and then you just go dirt.
Well, look, there's a portion of our dollars spent on healthcare go for insurance company profits, but most of it goes to provide for the services and equipment, and it goes to pay doctors and hospital administration. I don't think so. When you look at health insurance, that's just guaranteeing that they will pay for the cost of those services. Now, I
It
think
doesn't always work that way though. Sometimes people get dropped right when they need it the most. Wouldn't that prevent something like that happening?
Sure, but and there are protections in there now under Obamacare in terms of dropping from pre-existing conditions and whatnot. But I think it's important to realize that when you have an insurance company that is going to pay for something, and you might not even really look at the full cost of it, the actual total cost of, what they're charging you. Now, whether those costs are justified or not, I think that if you had government, in charge of the insurance claims, that would be limited by tax dollars, whether they could pay or not. But it could also, we'd have to borrow more money potentially if we want to cover those things. And so I think the problem is that the end consumer, the patient, doesn't really have a good idea of what they're paying or what things cost if they have insurance, because they don't care. Like, you either pay nothing or you pay a copay, but what you really don't care about, you don't care about it as long as it doesn't cost you a fortune. And so I think if you didn't have insurance and people paid out of pocket, they would quickly learn how much things actually are, and then either demand that those prices come down to the extent that they can, or they might, want everything to be paid for by the government. Because when you're sick or in need of medical services, you really don't care about the price of it. You just want to get better.
Right.
You want to, get fixed up in the hospital, or you want to have whatever medications you need to get better, or to
get back out there, yeah,
reduce pain or whatever. You really don't care how much it costs, as long as it's not costing you personally a fortune.
Right. You don't got to sell your house like a lot of Americans had to do.
I think that is the primary issue in terms of healthcare costs, is that we aren't really cognizant of the costs of healthcare.
That's true too. And the reason why I bring up the whole healthcare thing up is because out of the 2-hour debate, there was like a small sliver where this was actually a topic. And to be honest, they even said that Obamacare is, doing better than ever, and Americans are loving it. And it's, if you think about it, it's really the only kind of plan we've ever had in such thing, at least. And the moderators was asking about what they would do to make it better, and to be honest, or what their plan was to do about it. And crickets. I don't know about you, but that's what I heard. I heard no policies. I heard no plans. I heard no directions. So yeah, healthcare is not a Republican topic.
Trump had at least his first 2 years to
make that terrific plan.
Yeah, when he was asked about healthcare while he was running for president, or what he would replace Obamacare with, I'll never forget his answer. He said, something terrific. Something terrific. That's what he would replace it with. And when he got into office, what did he do? Absolutely nothing. He didn't do shit.
Nope. Didn't even consider it. Because you know why? It was never on the agenda. He just said these things to buy people's votes, and you know what I mean? And that was it, really. And once he got what he wanted, then he was like, all right, moving on. That's just how it is with him. Sad, but true.
Yeah, I mean, the Obama administration did the hard work of actually crafting a policy and implementing it.
And the original policy.
And passing it.
Right. And the original policy he had was actually even better than what we have. But why didn't we get that? Because the Republicans wouldn't allow it. They made him change it. Yeah, I believe we discussed that a few weeks ago.
Right. Yeah. You couldn't get that 60th vote in the Senate without removing the public option, which would have provided an alternative government-run healthcare insurance.
But that's all we got for this week. Strange Planet will have new episodes on YouTube every Friday. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.